Have you ever had that one neighbor? You know the type. The one who struts around like they own not just their house, but the entire neighborhood? The kind who acts like the HOA is their personal army, enforcing rules that benefit only them while making everyone else's life miserable? Well, allow me to introduce you to Karen, the undisputed queen of entitlement, the destroyer of driveway lights, and an all-around nightmare. She thought she could repeatedly invade my property, running over whatever she pleased without facing a single consequence. But oh, was she wrong. I had a plan involving industrial-grade revenge. And let me tell you, when karma finally struck back, it hit like a freight train. If you enjoy watching entitled people get exactly what they deserve, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. And hey, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to deal with an HOA Karen? Or better yet, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Jake had always known his neighborhood had its fair share of entitled folks. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to Karen. This woman had somehow convinced herself that her property extended far beyond the boundaries of her own yard. And unfortunately for Jake, that illusion of grandeur included his driveway, specifically his driveway lights. At first, it seemed like minor incidents, just a few cracked lights after she backed out her driveway. Accidents happen, right? He figured maybe she just misjudged the turn. No big deal. So, being a reasonable guy, he replaced them without making a fuss. But then it kept happening, over and over, like clockwork. Every few weeks, another set of shattered lights. And then one morning, as Jake sat by his window, sipping his coffee, he finally caught her red-handed. Karen, in her obnoxiously oversized SUV, rolled right over his driveway lights without so much as a pause. No hesitation, no glance back, just a clean, entitled crunch. Fuming, Jake decided enough was enough. He marched over just as she stepped out of her vehicle. "Hey, Karen," he called, trying to keep his voice calm. "I think you might have run over my driveway lights." She barely looked up from her phone, adjusting her sunglasses like the conversation was already beneath her. "Oh, those little things," she scoffed. "They were in my way." Jake blinked. In her way? They weren't even remotely close to her driveway. "You do realize those are on my property, right?" Karen let out a dramatic sigh, clearly annoyed at being forced into a conversation that wasn't all about her. "Well, maybe if you didn't put them so close to the curb, I wouldn't have to run them over," she said, smirking. "You should probably move them." Jake clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue, but deep down he knew arguing with Karen was like arguing with a brick wall. Pointless and infuriating. Still, he tried to be diplomatic. "Look, I'm just asking you to be careful. These aren't cheap to replace." Karen gave a fake laugh, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. You can afford it. Besides, they're ugly anyway. I'm doing you a favor." And with that, she turned on her heel and strutted back inside, leaving Jake standing there, seething. That's when he realized this wasn't an accident. This wasn't carelessness. This was a power move. She did it because she could, because she knew the HOA would back her up, because, in her mind, her convenience was worth more than his property. And Jake? Jake wasn't about to let that slide. Jake wasn't the type to start trouble, but he also wasn't the type to let someone walk all over him. So, like any reasonable person, he decided to go through the proper channels. First, he tried talking to her again. Maybe, just maybe, she had a shred of decency buried under all that entitlement. "Karen, I really need you to stop running over my lights," he said the next time he saw her. She barely looked up from watering her already dead potted plants. "Didn't we already have this conversation?" she sighed, completely bored. "Yes, and you're still doing it." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Well, maybe if your little lights weren't in my way, I wouldn't have to." Jake pinched the bridge of his nose, taking a deep breath to stop himself from losing his temper. "They're not in your way. They're on my property. Just stay on your driveway, and this won't be a problem." Karen smirked, shrugged. "Not my fault if they're my blind spot." A blind spot? Was she serious? Instead of arguing, Jake decided to take it up with the HOA. Maybe, just maybe, they'd actually do something. That was his first mistake. The meeting was a joke. The HOA president, Greg, an older man who practically worshipped Karen, listened to Jake's complaint with the enthusiasm of someone watching paint dry. Well, Jake, Greg sighed, rubbing his temples like Jake was the problem here. We can't control how people drive. Maybe you should consider moving the lights. Jake's hands curled into fists. They're not in the way. They're on my property. How is this my problem? Greg sighed dramatically. Look, we have to keep the peace in the neighborhood. Maybe just compromise. Jake stared. Compromise? With someone who's destroying my property. Greg shrugged. It's just driveway lights, Jake. And that was it. No fines. No warnings to Karen. No consequences. Just a pat on the head and a polite shove out the door. But the final straw? The very next day, Jake found a letter from the HOA in his mailbox. For a brief, hopeful second, he thought maybe they had finally done something. Nope. It was a warning. Your decorative lawn features are a potential hazard to vehicles and should be reconsidered. A hazard? His lights. Meanwhile, Kara was out there playing Grand Theft Auto with his property, and he was the one getting a warning? That's when he knew. Diplomacy wasn't going to work. If the HOA wasn't going to help, then he was going to have to handle this his way. Karen had been inconsiderate before, but now she was just plain malicious. Before, she was accidentally running over his lights. Now, she was doing it on purpose. The first time, he thought maybe it was just his imagination. But security camera footage doesn't lie. There she was, pulling out of her driveway, turning just enough to clip his crunch. The next morning, another broken light. Jake reviewed the footage, his blood boiling. But still, he gave her one last chance. Karen, he said, showing her the footage, this is to stop. She barely glanced at the screen before waving a dismissive hand. Oh, calm down, Jake. They're just lights. He clenched his jaw. They're my lights, and you're breaking them on purpose. Karen smirked, shrugged. Well, if you're dumb enough to put them there, that's not my problem. Then she laughed, like it was the funniest thing in the world. And that's when Jake knew this wasn't carelessness. This wasn't an accident. This was Karen flexing.